The storms were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. But the worst part wasn't just the deadly gales. Wind howling powerful enough to knock down buildings like rows of dominoes and lift the remaining debris of cities up into the air as if all that destruction weighed nothing. And it wasn't just the lightning, those arcs of crimson forking down from above. If one struck the ground near you, and one almost always did, the sheer force of it would knock you off your feet. The last thing you'd feel as you flailed helplessly in the air was the relentless pain of your body being disintegrated by the energy of the blood-red lightning, until there was nothing left of you for anyone to find. Yet somehow that wasn't the worst part either, and it wasn't even the noise of it all either. That deafening cacophony of booming thunder and wild hurricane-force winds so loud, nobody could ignore it, all underscored by the screams of a world lost in suffering and madness. No, the worst part of it all was the sky. Whether anyone looked up, where there had once been that clear, calming blue, was now a swirling mass of nightmares. Many were surprised just how much they missed turning to that sky, that odd, universal comfort it brought. The knowledge that no matter how bleak things got, the sun would set on every bad day and rise again to mark the start of another, filled with potential. That promise of a future, no matter how uncertain, was replaced with a reminder of one thing, that this new, darker day had no end. There was no sunrise or sunset, no night or day. All that uncertainty and potential was replaced with certain doom, represented by a sky that looked like a river of blood. Deep reds and blacks swirled and thrashed above like the raging waves of the ocean, casting bolts of lightning down at the earth. Not to mention what else would occasionally drop from that blood-stained sky. Nobody had much information about how this all had started, how the world had become such an unrecognizable hellscape. Cynics would say that the world was already hell long before the sky turned red, although there wasn't much time for sarcastic jokes like that nowadays. As far as the few human beings that had survived could remember, the day everything changed had been little more than an ordinary day on planet Earth. One moment, things were normal. People were working tirelessly at their boring 9-to-5 jobs. Somewhere in the world, others had long since fallen asleep in a different time zone. Then all of a sudden, it appeared. Few survivors had actually seen it for themselves, and even fewer had lived to tell the tale. But rumors and whispers spread from camp to camp, dispossessed people huddling together in the ruins of houses or in abandoned subway tunnels that would hear the stories. And somehow, deep down in the fearful recesses of their hearts, they all knew, despite never having seen it, that it was real, the masked god. When it stepped upon the earth, it walked like any other person would. Its body even appeared to be human, an aged, older man's body, wrinkled and elderly, although not completely decrepit. Yet, it was his face, or what covered it, that really instilled that sense of fear and dread in anyone that heard the rumors. That being wore a mask, a porcelain comedy mask, the kind commonly associated with ancient Greek theater. It had a fixed, unnerving expression, a wide smile of twisted glee. It was almost as if it was getting some sick enjoyment out of all the chaos and destruction that had befallen the world, like it was pleased with its own handiwork. A thick black substance oozed from the mask too, adding to its unsettling appearance as streaks of what looked like tar trickled down the chalky white surface. It leaked out from underneath as well, dripping over the bony shoulders of the old man that wore it. Not one survivor that heard the stories of this monster understood what it was or where it had come from, but as if by some deific influence, they all knew it was responsible for creating the hell they now lived in. That knowledge kept them hidden, kept them afraid, and kept them from fighting back. As had always been the case even before this apocalypse had been unleashed on the world, the only people who knew the truth were the ones who had been working for the SCP Foundation. They had more than their fair share of answers about what had happened and who or what this mask-wearing menace was, but naturally kept that information secret from the wider world. Not that there was much point in keeping secrets anymore. After all, there was hardly much of a world left for the Foundation to hide things from, and even fewer former personnel who had lasted this long. Even then, there was only a handful at the SCP Foundation who knew everything that had led to the current catastrophe. Most of the researchers and guards that had been going about their ordinary duties, running tests on contained anomalies or patrolling the site, where a certain possessive mask was housed. The next thing everyone there knew was the blaring noise of alarms. Mobile task force troopers racing down the hallways. Their commander might have yelled something about a break-in, someone having gained access to the supposedly secure Foundation facility and stealing one of their anomalous objects. But not everybody, even those working in the same building, would have overheard that. They definitely didn't miss what happened next, though. As further alarms sounded, alerting the staff on site of a containment breach, the facility itself was torn apart in a flurry of chaos. Personnel, researchers, security, MTF soldiers were being incinerated, burned, until there was literally no trace of them left. Something stepped through the very brickwork of the building itself, smashing a hole through every room it passed until it burst out of the side. Then all of a sudden, the alarms weren't the loudest sound. Something else started deafening the Foundation staff who were still standing. The world outside had become even more chaotic. The sky had turned red, and all around, people were being killed, structures decimated, cities blown away in moments. Naturally, this wasn't the first time the Foundation had stared right into the face of an XK class end-of-the-world scenario. Given the widespread presence and surveillance they had around the planet, it didn't take them long to learn of the horrors that were unfolding. The key word there was that they had a widespread presence, as in past tense. They thought they had enough resources to retaliate too. Word quickly spread throughout the various arms of the SCP Foundation, informing the wider organization of the situation and urging them to work as one to enact a plan to stop what was happening. All they knew for certain was that SCP-035 had been removed from containment. Also known as the Possessive Mask, the object was known to have its own sentience and an innate ability to telepathically influence unwitting victims into wearing it. However, the mask also secreted a corrosive black substance, which normally dissolved the body of anyone who put it on. By itself, SCP-035 was nowhere near powerful enough to unleash a global catastrophe, though. Unfortunately, it had managed to influence someone who was that powerful into putting it on. Another anomaly. While to the untrained eye, SCP-343 could easily be mistaken for an elderly human man, those at the Foundation knew that the fact he was now wearing the Possessive Mask was some of the worst news they could have ever received. Although none of the researchers working for the SCP Foundation, in fact, not even the O5 Council, knew if this was true, the colloquial nickname for SCP-343 was God. He not only claimed to be the sole creator of the entire universe, but had also exhibited extensive reality warping abilities, advanced even for an anomalous being. His powers seemingly had no known limit in how they could be used to alter the world around him, although the old man himself seemed to be a passive, kindly soul, rarely causing active harm to other beings under normal circumstances. Of course, normal circumstances didn't include having the corruptive SCP-035 on his face, effectively putting the mask in the driver's seat and allowing it to use SCP-343's powers to lay waste to anything before it. The Foundation quickly diverted their considerable assets to a brute force retaliation in the hopes that a full-scale assault on the combined creature would somehow force a separation of the Possessive Mask from SCP-343's face. The tricky thing about this situation was, God's powers and the fact that he was an immortal, ageless being of potentially incomprehensible form all meant he couldn't be harmed. Causing external damage to him was extremely difficult. That was good news in some regard after all. The Foundation didn't want to kill 343 if they could help it. They knew he wasn't acting on his own accord, but his indestructibility also meant that the corrosive goo that was secreted from SCP-035 had little to no effect on its new impervious host. That meant it could keep going, keep unleashing hell, and stopping it was going to take a lot of manpower. Fortunately, the SCP Foundation never had any shortage of people to throw at a problem, and their ethos didn't really place much value on human life. They mobilized every mobile task force at their disposal, every one of them filled with ranks of highly trained elite operatives. Among the Foundation's forces were even MTF agents who had themselves been altered through anomalous means, their bodies augmented with technology and cybernetics, or their strength specially enhanced. Deploying the full might of their amassed forces, the SCP Foundation took the fight to SCP-035. with the goal of stopping its reign of terror and freeing SCP-343 if possible. The hybridized mask-wearing reality warper had already caused considerable damage since it had started its rampage. Although its motivations were far from political, the wearer of the anguish mask had begun with a devastating show of power, wiping numerous cities off the map. While the rest of the world scrambled to find some way of responding, the masked god teleported itself across the globe, destroying central governments and further crippling their own opportunities to initiate an armed response. In short, this meant the Foundation's move was to be humanity's last stand, their final chance to stop SCP-035 from its current course of harnessing the wise old man's power to turn the world into its own personal, nightmarish playground. To say there was a lot riding on the MTF assault would be an understatement, as would saying it went badly. When met with times of defeat, the old, rather morbid adage of fallen soldiers being sent home in bags is often applied. But if the masked hybrid had sent the Foundation its MTF troops back to them encased in body bags, then that would have been far kinder than what it actually did. The collected mobile task forces, the Foundation's own private army, were mobilized to Washington. Under the influence of the Possessive Mask, SCP-343 had wiped out not only the main seat of power in the United States, but the Pentagon as well, disabling the country's defenses. Suddenly, a mass of aerial transports and ground vehicles came hurtling towards the crater it had left behind. As it turned to look, the wide grin of satisfaction on SCP-035 became a long frown. Thanks to its new host's omniscience, it instantly recognized the foot soldiers of the organization that had kept it caged for so long. As the amassed MTFs marched towards it, the masked god stepped out to meet the oncoming army, one being against thousands of troops, if not tens of thousands. If the mask had affixed itself to the face of any other anomaly, those soldiers might have stood a slim chance. The combined creature casually raised the bony arms of its host's body, the Foundation forces breaking into a charge the very second they saw it move. Like a tidal wave, they rushed towards their target, only for each individual operative to quickly realize that they had stopped moving. They were still running, legs still in motion, but their feet had been lifted off the ground. Plucked from the very earth they each had stood on, the MTFs were stuck in mid-air, defying the forces of gravity and unable to free themselves. Collectively, the Foundation's army looked to SCP-035, its tragic porcelain frown having switched back to the wide grin, punctuating the sick satisfaction it was about to take from what came next. It gave a click of God's lean fingers, and each of the MTF troops it had suspended in midair were shredded at the molecular level. Their bodies erupted with a spray of deep red viscera, each and every one of them being pulled to pieces from the inside out. Flesh, bone, and blood melting away, breaking down, becoming ash, and then atoms, and then nothing. It took around a minute. Not that it was terribly exerting for SCP-343's powers, but just because of how many troops the Foundation had sent to try and stop it. A mighty show of force, and all for nothing. With their mobile task forces decimated like a row of helpless tin soldiers, the SCP Foundation had lost its primary method of fighting back. But they were far from safe from the masked god's reach. Thanks to its hosts, SCP-035 wasn't all-knowing, but all-seeing, and able to be anywhere and everywhere in the blink of an eye. It began hunting the surviving pockets of the Foundation personnel. Out of nowhere, it would teleport into wherever they were hiding and turn their bodies inside out, or rearranging the functions of every orifice on their faces, only to vanish like a ghost, leaving no trace and no survivors. The braver ones tried desperately to come up with some new plan, a revised way to stop a creature that could be anywhere and do anything. On the other hand, the Foundation leadership, the more highly ranked members like the Overwatch Council, went to the ground. Plenty of them had contingency plans in place for Armageddon, and they were prepared to wait out the apocalypse in their own secluded safe haven. But with the Foundation all but gone, that's when the monsters got loose. No longer having anyone to guard them, to maintain their specific specialized containment procedures, the SCPs still held at Foundation sites were unleashed on the world. Untold horrors came spilling out of the ruined facilities, each one now acting as its own Pandora's box, bursting its lock and having its terrible contents lay waste to the planet already awash with chaos. A lot of the anomalies thrived in the world that SCP-035 had created, once they were finished fighting amongst themselves in the struggle of escaping their containment. Soon there were packs of SCP-745 running wild on the ruined highways, using their bioluminescent lights to hunt human survivors who were attempting to make the dangerous trek across open country. Meanwhile, a plague began spreading amongst other camps of these post-apocalyptic humans, a strange disease that seemed to cause people to rapidly grow extra teeth, overproducing them until SCP-4910, the Grinner, could catch up to them. Then there were the SCPs that fled the nightmare that the masked god had made of the world. Any that could travel between dimensions or remove themselves from this layer of reality quickly absconded to avoid the chaos. Some just went about their business, as if nothing had really changed. The plague doctor mostly kept to himself, traveling from place to place on foot, only stopping when he encountered people afflicted with the pestilence, before moving on in search of others. Some of the anomalies tried to help people. Rumors spread among some survivor camps of a half-man, half-cactus, leaving them food and supplies in the night, with a note that read, "From your friendly neighborhood cactus man." There weren't many who dared to oppose the creator of this dark new world, but some anomalies sought to challenge the rule of this combined creature. Perhaps they thought SCP-035 and SCP-343 couldn't possibly be all-powerful as the story said, that it would be easy to kill the king and assume control over his kingdom of chaos. There were plenty of other anomalies that had floated the idea, not just the other reality warpers, but those that had figured out that if they separated the mask from its host, then this world would become their hellish paradise to rule over, so long as SCP-343 didn't instantly undo all the damage. But there was one that didn't want control. It didn't even necessarily mind the whole world had been turned into a walking nightmare. It just wanted to stand against the hybrid of malicious mask and all-powerful deity out of spite, based on nothing but pure hatred for any and all other forms of life other than itself. And it was that confrontation that would serve as a warning to the rest of the SCPs now freely roaming the world. SCP-682 slithered out into the open, claws coated with a fresh coating of blood from its latest slaughter, wetting the countless layers beneath that had already dried. The hard-to-destroy reptile had tracked the scent of the Possessive Mask's oozing black secretions, bringing the beast maw to porcelain face, with the combined being responsible for distorting the very fabric of the world. Already knowing the foul lizard was near thanks to its host's foresight, SCP-035's visage had already been locked in that unhappy grimace, dreading the approach of the day it would have to face the tenacious, irritating, regenerative reptile. It turned its host's body to face the huge beast. The trails of black streaked down its frowning face, looking like angry tears staining its carved off-white skin. The two exchanged no words. SCP-682 had no doubt this pairing of corruptive mask and passive god already knew why it had come looking for it. And it was right. The Possessive Mask had long been looking into the mind of SCP-343 to prepare. It knew it wasn't one of the old man's children. In fact, God had completely denied ever being responsible for the creation of the unkillable monster. There was almost no strategy, even with the infinite power of its host's reality warping abilities, that SCP-035 could definitively kill SCP-682. Building up to a charge, the reptile swiped at the masked god, its talons narrowly nicking the porcelain surface of the mask the very second it teleported out of the way. Reappearing behind the monster, SCP-035 compelled its host body to lift its elderly arm and decimate the beast the same way it had to the Foundation's forces. With a fearsome hiss, the reptile's body was pulled apart. It growled with anger, annoyed and enraged more than deterred. Its strong, scaly limbs quickly regenerated, bone and muscle regrowing to replace what the masked god had torn away. SCP-682 gave a swipe of its tail, knocking the masked god a few feet away, reeling him. The anomalous hybrid teleported yet again, this time to inside the monstrous reptile. Shrinking down to almost infinitely small, the mask and god wrenched apart SCP-682's atoms, ripping up strand after strand of its very DNA, physically trying to unmake it on a cellular level. On the outside, the creature's body disintegrated as it roared, feeling its very genetic material breaking down, only for it to rapidly reform just as SCP-343, wearing SCP-035, reappeared in front of it. There was no way for the masked god to kill the monster, despite how much it tried. sending it hurtling into the fire of the sun, punching it into other dimensions, moving it down the recursive stack of reality to make its existence little more than fiction. Eventually, the Possessive Mask had to reconsider the problem at hand. Even with infinite power, the unkillable still remained unkillable. Rather than ask whether that meant its own power was truly unlimited, it instead resolved to the only option it had left. With a snap of its host's fingers, the combined creature sent the hard-to-kill reptile away, far away. Universes upon multiverses of distances were put between the masked god and SCP-682, turning back towards the destruction it had wrought on this world. SCP-035 knew that the regenerating reptile would be back, but for now, it had more chaos to unfurl. Now go and check out What If SCP-096 Wore SCP-035 for another alternate anomalous outcome of another SCP wearing the infamous Possessive Mask. And if you haven't already, then why not watch the first installment of What If SCP-343 Wore SCP-035 to catch up on the story so far.